I was so pumped because it's so raw and so real. I can't believe they smashed everything into an hour and a half. That's a lot.
The Motley Crue movie promised the wild truth behind rock's most explosive band. But what if the real story is louder, darker, and far more chaotic than the film ever showed? Beneath the glam and glory hides a past filled with missing faces, twisted timelines, and moments too raw for Hollywood. Why were certain stories buried? What truths got polished into legend? Stay tuned, because once the curtain lifts, the picture of Motley Crue's rise, rebellion, and ruin reveals cracks that no spotlight can hide. First singer omitted. The Motley Crue movie claims to tell the unvarnished truth, yet it entirely skips over the band's original lead singer, a surprising omission that raises questions about the story's accuracy. Before Vince Neil took the mic, there was a vocalist named Troy Odeen, who briefly held that spot. Odeen recorded a demo with the group, but the relationship quickly soured, and he was out the door before the band hit their stride. The movie's silence on this chapter shapes the narrative by focusing on Vince Neil as the sole frontman from the start, which simplifies the band's complex formation. Tommy Lee's memoir describes Odeen as a round and rather simple man, someone with undeniable vocal talent but peculiar habits that rubbed Nikki Sixx the wrong way. Most notably, Odeen had a habit of constantly wearing white gloves, even when it interfered with basic band activities like clapping and background vocals. This quirk became a point of irritation, exacerbating tensions within the group. Mick Mars also had a strong dislike for Odeen, dismissing him as a fat hippie and making it clear the guitarist had little patience for the singer's presence. This early discord contributed significantly to the decision to push Odeen out, but the movie glosses over these internal struggles entirely. Instead, it jumps straight into the recognized lineup, leaving audiences unaware of the chaotic beginnings behind the scenes. The neglect to acknowledge the band's first singer raises the broader issue of how much the film chooses to alter or omit to create a more streamlined story. What other realities might have been sacrificed for dramatic effect? The real story of Motley Crue's origin is messier and far more layered than the movie's version. Each band member's early contributions and conflicts shaped the dynamic that would eventually blow up on stage and in headlines. Yet, by omitting Odeen's brief tenure, the film enforces a narrative that feels neat but incomplete. Fans who know the backstory are left puzzling over why such a significant element was erased. What feels like a minor detail at first actually hints at a pattern. The film presents a sanitized, polished history rather than the raw truth fans expected. This omission speaks to larger storytelling choices that prioritize certain characters while sidelining others. The complete Motley Crue story includes struggles, failed partnerships, and compromises that make their eventual success more compelling and more believable. In some ways, ignoring Odeen reflects the band's own selective memory about their early days. It is easier to promote the myth of a perfect lineup and that instant chemistry than to admit to missteps and false starts. This filtering colors not just the band's story, but also how viewers understand their rise from the gritty Los Angeles music scene. Ultimately, the absence of this first singer foreshadows a pattern of omissions and simplifications that runs throughout the movie. The dirt on Motley Crue's beginnings is dirtier than what the film lets on, and as we dig deeper, more contradictions emerge. This tangled start is just the first clue that the movie's true story might need closer scrutiny. Before we look further into the band's internal relationships, there's another layer to their early days that the movie simplifies: Tommy Lee's musical background and just how he came to join the band. Tommy Lee's early band experience. The movie paints a picture of Tommy Lee as a young, relatively inexperienced drummer who meets Nikki Sixx by chance after a London show, impressing him with some drumstick tricks. While the scene makes for great drama, the reality is more complex and suggests a seasoned musician stepping into the fold. Before Motley Crue, Tommy Lee already had credible band experience as a member of a group called Sweet 19. This nuance shifts how we see Lee's entry, not as a rookie stumbling into rock stardom, but as a player with real chops and connections. Contrary to the film's implication that Sixx and Lee's bonding was pure serendipity, the bassist had actually been around the local scene for some time. Nikki Sixx himself had twice failed to join other bands, including a two-time unsuccessful audition, before he and Lee crossed paths through mutual contacts. The real introduction came through Greg Leon, the guitarist for Sweet 19, who briefly played with early versions of Motley Crue, but left the group. Leon's departure led Sixx and Lee to search for a new guitarist, a phase the movie skips entirely. This background uncovers more deliberate networking and musical strategizing than the movie's casual diner meeting might imply. Tommy Lee was far from a novice, but rather a part of a big network of musicians who were into and got along well within Los Angeles's tough glam and hard rock scene. His skills in the marching band were good for drumstick spinning, too, but it was his earlier band work that set him up for bigger things. Realizing this changes the whole picture about Lee's role in the band's founding. His position, and instead of just getting lucky, was one of several skilled players coming together to create something new. This feature also underlines the collaboration among the City of Angels musicians at that time, their bands quickly changing, sharing members, and trying hard to get the attention other bands had. It reminds us that even the legendary tales have their origin in more ordinary things. By simplifying the movie, a part of the context is removed, while being replaced with a nice cinematic moment of the first meeting. The creation of that moment is in agreement with the overall direction of the film, which is to smooth out the complications to fit a tighter storyline. Knowing Lee's real background then brings the focus onto the group's musical credentials as a whole. These were not amateurs who had no clue, but musicians who got their experience. This kind of background information enables one to see how Nikki Sixx would then be the one to lead the band to greater ambition. Moreover, it indicates that the legend around Motley Crue's insta-famous rise was really carefully managed, omitting the many steps and connections that got them there. Knowing these details, one is able to get a better view of their early chemistry and difficulties. With Lee and Sixx's history clarified, it's important to examine how the band eventually settled on their iconic frontman, Vince Neil, since even his story is not quite as straightforward as the movie suggests. Vince Neil's audition reality. The Netflix movie portrays Vince Neil's entry into Motley Crue as a smooth, almost immediate decision. Just a quick chat, a brief internal debate, and then an easy invitation to audition. While this makes for satisfying storytelling, it downplays a more turbulent reality. In truth, Neil initially missed his first audition altogether, forcing the band to try other vocalists, including Troy Odeen. This rejection introduced delays and doubt before Neil could officially join, complicating the story considerably. Tommy Lee played a key role in persuading Neil to give the band a real chance after initial setbacks. Neil's initial absence caused the band to experiment with other singers, but these attempts failed spectacularly. Lee's persistence eventually convinced Neil to show up, apparently with his girlfriend in tow, who was reportedly not a fan of the band's raw sound. This detail conflicts with the movie's portrayal, which suggests that she quickly warmed up once she heard the band's signature sound. Beyond the audition drama, Neil faced personal challenges as he joined the band. He came into the studio with lyric sheets in hand because he had only been with the group a few days. This reality starkly contrasts with the movie's confident depiction of the singer stepping right in, prepared and sure-footed. It underscores just how rough and improvised the early days were, even for someone who would become the band's unforgettable frontman. Neil's tougher introduction hints at the band's chaotic, unpredictable beginnings, undermining the idea of a neat fairy tale start. The real negotiation with personality and music had bumps early on, reflecting the messy human realities behind the rock star image. This struggle gives more weight to the band's eventual rise and helps explain why tensions were an inevitable part of their journey. The movie also sneaks in a bit of conflict with Neil's girlfriend, but it underplays how much opposition there really was to the band's hardcore partying style. His decision to join, despite resistance, speaks to the deep personal stakes and pressures each member faced. Neil's complicated entry exemplifies the push and pull that would define Motley Crue's dynamic for years. Understanding these audition realities shows the band in a more vulnerable, less glamorized light. The myth that everything fell perfectly into place is challenged by these behind-the-scenes facts. It also foreshadows future struggles over loyalty, addiction, and personal demons that the movie touches on, but often sidesteps. This more truthful perspective on Neil's start with the band helps frame the larger story unfolding. The rise of Motley Crue was never a simple tale of instant glory, but one of messy choices, flawed characters, and hard-won success. And while the movie captures some of that energy, it skips over much of what made their journey authentic. But before the fame truly ignited, their first big night on stage would set the tone for everything to come, and the movie's version of that night couldn't be further from what really happened. First gig exaggerations. The Netflix movie dramatizes Motley Crue's debut performance as a nervous, nearly freezing set, played to an almost empty room. This portrayal creates a sense of awkward uncertainty that quickly turns into a brawl when someone spits on Vince Neil's iconic leather pants. The ensuing chaos is painted as the moment that wins over the crowd and cements the band's reputation for wild energy. While this makes for an entertaining story beat, the real first gig was quite different and far more confident than the clumsy introduction the film shows. According to accounts and concert reviews at the time, Motley Crue's true first performance was at the Starwood Club, a notable venue in Los Angeles. The event was highly anticipated, and the band opened for an established outfit called Y&T in front of a healthy crowd of around 600 people. Rather than fumbling uncertainly through their songs, Motley Crue played a tight and pumped set that laid the foundation for their growing reputation on the Hollywood scene. The real audience response reflected excitement and validation, not confusion or hostility. This discrepancy highlights just how much the movie bends reality to fit the trope of the struggling underdog. In truth, members like Nikki Sixx and Tommy Lee were well-known figures in the local scene, bringing with them experience from previous bands that the film downplays. Vince Neil's ability to command the stage was almost his defining talent, making the almost freezing new lead singer scenario less believable. Mick Mars, a veteran player, also brought a level of professionalism that sharply contrasts with the fumbling impression. Dramatizing their first concert as a rocky beginning creates tension, but at the same time, it overlooks an essential aspect of the story. Motley Crue's journey was chaotic, yet it included some moments of victory and talent. These early victories were the foundation of their support from the fans who rallied around them, not due to outrageous fights or near catastrophes, but because of their music and performance. The filmmaker's decision to overlook these details reduces the complexity of the band's rise and distorts their origin narrative. Moreover, the decision to present the audience's reaction as unfriendly at first is in stark contrast to the historical accounts, which indicate the opposite and celebrate the growing popularity of the band from the very beginning. Their reputation was not only created in spite of a difficult start, it was mainly made through the excited audience reactions and the increasing buzz around them in the rock music scene. Such a fact gives more credence to the band's later erratic behavior, since it is then seen as stemming from self-assurance and success over a period of time instead of being a product of desperation. The film's depiction of the events also overlooks the close-knit ties of the band members to the music scene, which very quickly helped the band to gain the necessary momentum. The enthusiasm of the audience is one of the reasons why the early performances of Motley Crue attracted more attention and opportunities, and thus became different from a lot of other bands that were trying to be heard during the 1980s. It is this foundation that we need to recognize in order to change the perspective of their story. Not as hapless rookies, but rather as determined professionals who were really up to making their mark. In the end, the true first concert event unravels a detour of the band stepping into their future, confident, not scared. The myth of a failed or embarrassing start does not align with the facts. Motley Crue's actual journey has been more complex, offering real achievements even before their mainstream breakthrough. These early moves were the birth of their legendary status. Understanding their grounded, energetic start leads us to the individual personalities that shaped the group, especially the enigmatic Mick Mars, a figure whose true character contrasts with the film's depiction. Mick Mars's true character. In the Netflix movie, Mick Mars is portrayed as the aging, world-weary guitarist who often seems out of step with his energetic young bandmates. His role is reduced to that of a surly advisor, occasionally dispensing sarcastic wisdom and begrudgingly tolerating the wild antics around him. This portrayal, though capturing some of his traits, only scratches the surface of Mars's complex reality, both as a musician and a person. The real Mick Mars was far from simply the voice of reason or the sober presence. Mars suffered from ankylosing spondylitis, a rare form of arthritis that progressively fused his spine, causing him serious pain and limiting his mobility throughout his career. Yet, rather than retreating from the rock lifestyle, Mars embraced it fully, often self-medicating with alcohol and other substances to cope. His physical struggles only added layers to his persona, both as a determined artist battling his body and as a man who wasn't afraid to partake in the excesses that defined Motley Crue's reputation. The movie gives Mick a selective respect for women and a refusal to participate in groupie-related debauchery, traits which many fans see as emblematic of his more mature stance. However, the truth is somewhat more complicated. In a 1985 interview, Mars famously stated that groupies were a blessing and acknowledged their key role in his life and career. Nikki Sixx even warned not to be fooled by Mars's seemingly virtuous exterior, saying the guitarist had his share of wild behavior behind closed doors. Mars's musical contributions are essential to understanding the band's sound and success. A veteran of many earlier bands, he brought professionalism and a gritty, blues-infused style that helped define Motley Crue's edge. His playing was often the undercurrent in the band's more raucous moments, providing structure amid chaos. His artistry became increasingly important as the band evolved and faced internal and external pressures. Personality-wise, Mars has been described as stoic, sarcastic, and sometimes acerbic, often disengaging from youthful band drama through humor and cynicism. While the film shows him as tired of his bandmates' excesses, The reality is that Mars himself lived a life defined by those very excesses, his struggles with health and addiction, and the determination to keep performing despite them reveal a man not simply resigned, but fighting on his own terms. His story also reflects the contradictions inherent in the rock star lifestyle. Pain and pleasure intertwined. Brilliance and self-destruction coexisting. His rebellious spirit made him a legend for fans, but it also led to physical and emotional battles that stretched over decades. This duality is difficult to capture fully in a 2-hour film. More than just the old guy of the band, Mars was an integral force whose influence extended behind the scenes. His contributions to songwriting and musicianship exerted a steady hand on the group's direction, balancing the youthful chaos that often surrounded them. Mars's true character adds depth to the Motley Crue narrative. He wasn't merely a grumpy elder statesman, but a complicated artist, fighting illness, addiction, and the demanding pressures of fame. This reality contrasts sharply with the movie's simplified image of him, revealing a much richer and more human story. From his resilience and contradictions, we glimpse Motley Crue as a band made not just of wild storylines, but deeply flawed, determined individuals. Their personalities clashed and combined in ways that forged their sound and legend, far beyond the movie's surface portrayal. Where Mick Mars embodies the band's gritty endurance, Nikki Sixx's near-death experience reveals another side of the band's dark realities, details the film chose to compress and obscure. Nikki Sixx's overdose context. Nikki Sixx's near-death experience in 1987 is one of Motley Crue's most infamous moments, and the movie does include this event, but in a much more condensed and sanitized form than what really happened. The film shows the immediate crisis as Sixx passes out after an overdose, but it largely leaves out the circumstances leading up to it and the critical role of others who were present. This omission softens the gravity of the moment and the wider connections within the rock scene that surrounded it. On December 23, 1987, Sixx had been partying heavily all day with a group that included some well-known figures like Steven Adler and Slash from Guns N' Roses, as well as Robin Crosby from the band Rat. These connections to fellow rock stars are significant because they paint a vivid picture of the intense but interconnected world Motley Crue inhabited. The presence of the Guns N' Roses members, particularly Slash's girlfriend, who administered mouth-to-mouth resuscitation, was crucial in saving Sixx's life before paramedics arrived, a dramatic detail the movie largely ignores. This absence of detail creates a missed opportunity to emphasize the stark reality of the rock and roll lifestyle at that time, where life-threatening indulgence was common but often narrowly survived due to moments of human intervention. It also glosses over the sense of community among musicians who lived roller coaster lives, sometimes saving each other even as they spiraled out of control. The movie's vague depiction reduces Sixx's ordeal to a quick dramatic beat, instead of exploring the wider human and social context. The film downplays the role of his friends and the chaotic atmosphere that led to the overdose. Thus, it sanitizes a defining moment in Sixx's life that not only shaped the band's story, but also served as a brutal wake-up call. The actual event was more than just a collapse on the floor. It was a near-fatal convergence of addiction, friendship, and luck. To comprehend that, fans must consider the whole emotional and psychological toll it took on the bassist. Furthermore, Sixx's overdose signaled a change of era and represented the excesses that had attracted the band's fame, but had also driven it to the brink of extinction. The film presents only a small part of the aftermath, which consisted not only of personal recovery, but also of introspection and the transformation of the band's outlook. These layers are crucial for seeing Motley Crue as more than just wild hedonists, but rather as individuals who were fighting very real demons. The film's decision to hint very vaguely at these other characters and situations, as in the case of the showing of a faraway Slash-like figure on a couch, gives the scene the quality of being alone and unfinished. People who are acquainted with the entire story may feel let down by this absence of context, since it diminishes the significance of the interlinking rock world and the very real rescue operation that rescued Sixx. Besides, the movie's stance on Nikki Sixx's overdose is indicative of another aspect, that is, the industry's tendency to choose sweeping, dramatic moments over subtle and complex realities. The incident, deprived of its fundamental details, loses to a certain extent its heaviness and the vivid moral it brought about. Such an overlook also goes against the band's public image of being notoriously indulgent, thereby ironically quieting one of their darkest personal stories. Sixx's overdose story also sets a somber backdrop to another tragic event involving Vince Neil, one that the movie addresses, but with significant omissions and downplaying. Vince Neil and Razzle incident. The death of Razzle, the drummer from Hanoi Rocks, after a car crash involving Vince Neil, remains one of the darkest chapters in Motley Crue's history. The movie acknowledges the accident, but tones down the severity and the role that intoxication played in the tragedy. Rather than fully confronting Neil's heavy intoxication and the serious consequences, the film presents the incident as a momentary lapse in judgment, minimizing its impact and Neil's responsibility. In reality, Neil was reportedly heavily intoxicated at the time he got behind the wheel on December 8, 1984. Instead of a mild beer buzz, as the film suggests, eyewitnesses and reports emphasize that he was swerving dangerously around obstacles, including a stationary fire truck, while driving well above the posted speed limit. He struck two oncoming cars before coming to a halt, a much harsher and more reckless scenario than the movie's light-hearted banter implies. The movie's portrayal of Neil as mostly coherent and in control contrasts sharply with accounts that highlight the severity of his intoxication and the potential for much greater harm. By framing the crash as a brief distraction during a friendly conversation, the film downplays the real risks and the tragic consequences. The death of a fellow musician and friend. This softening obscures the gravity of the situation for Neil and the people affected. This incident affected Neil's career and personal life profoundly, but the movie's tepid treatment may be an attempt to shield the frontman's image or to avoid alienating fans uncomfortable with the darker reality. Either way, it leaves viewers without a full understanding of how serious and life-altering the crash was for everyone involved. The tragedy goes beyond just the loss of Razzle. It marked a turning point that underscored the dangers of the lifestyle Motley Crue and their peers embraced. The film's failure to convey the true depth of this event contributes to a narrative that veers toward glamorization rather than accountability. Furthermore, the shocking realities of the actual event intensify our perception of the enormity of the situation that Motley Crue had to confront, not only as superstars, but also as such that their decisions could result in real death consequences. The movie's comical approach fails to deliver that emotional and ethical pressure, thereby weakening the warning aspect of this crucial incident. Acknowledging the event's gravity essentially transforms Neil's later career and personal setbacks, such as quitting the group and attempting to deal with the aftermath, into multifaceted issues. It also clarifies why his journey was not as straightforward and complicated as the movie has presented. The reality of the Razzle incident, combined with the truths behind Nikki Sixx's overdose, reminds us that Motley Crue's story is not just one of excess and rebellion. but also of tragedy and tough reckonings. Details often sacrificed for a flashier narrative. Reunion myths. The Netflix movie wraps up with a seemingly heartfelt reunion of Motley Crue's original lineup, portraying the band members as old friends smoothly making amends after a petty argument. The encounter feels organic, culminating in a quick conversation over drinks that supposedly fixes everything and brings them back together. While this narrative offers closure and warmth, it greatly simplifies a far more complicated and reluctant reunion process behind the scenes. In reality, Motley Crue's reunion was neither effortless nor entirely welcomed by all parties involved. After Vince Neil's first departure in 1992, the band brought in John Corabi as their vocalist. Despite Corabi's lukewarm reception by fans, Motley Crue's management had no immediate intention of dropping him. The decision to part ways with Corabi and reunite with Neil came more from outside pressures, primarily the combined efforts of Neil's and Motley Crue's managers, than from a spontaneous desire to mend fences. Neil's solo career was active during much of his time away from the band. He quickly signed with Warner Brothers and released his debut solo album in 1993, followed by tours with major acts like Van Halen. This suggests he wasn't sitting idle, nursing old wounds as the movie implies, but was instead actively pursuing a music career separate from Motley Crue. This context challenges the film's portrayal of Neil as desperate for reconciliation. The reunion talks were reportedly more business-driven than sentimental. Both parties recognized the enormous financial potential of the original lineup reuniting, especially given the waning popularity of glam metal amid the grunge explosion. The music industry itself was pushing for a comeback, and management carefully orchestrated the reunion as a profitable venture rather than a purely emotional reconciliation. The sudden departure of John Corabi from the band highlights the inconsistency of the reunion. He was, as it was said, completely caught off guard, and after being the fifth member for only about a month, he was dismissed without much notice. This turmoil behind the scenes is in sharp contrast to the movie's portrayal of smoothness and emphasizes the sometimes miserable realities of the band and the commercial side of things, considering over friendship. In addition, the wider context indicates that the reunion was not simply a moment of forgiveness, but rather a complicated, tactical decision influenced by market forces, falling album sales, and the changing preferences of rock listeners in the mid-1990s. The band was under pressure to reunite with their original hard rock sound and to tap into the nostalgia of their original fans, which the film almost entirely ignores. The story of the reunion gets complicated, even by Mick Mars's health problems during that period. He was largely affected by arthritis, and his use of painkillers to deal with the pain made it difficult for him to perform at all. He had to face such personal battles as having hip replacement surgery, as well as medical intervention. All these difficulties added up to the point that the physical rejoining of the band was an agonizing and painful experience, in stark contrast to the quick hospital visit depicted in the movie. The idea of an organic reunion neglects to mention years of friction, failed experiments, management maneuvering, and personal hardship. The movie's version portrays a finality, while the truth shows a group that had to work through such hard decisions, sacrifice illusions, and navigate business realities so far from heartfelt camaraderie. Motley Crue's real story is far messier and more nuanced than the Netflix movie suggests. From overlooked band members to omitted details about their darkest moments, truth often gets sacrificed for dramatization. If you enjoyed peeling back the layers behind the glam, make sure to like and subscribe for more raw, untold stories from rock history. And don't just stop here, stick around and watch the next video on your screen. It connects the dots this one could only scratch.